Hey guys, welcome back. Tonight, let us slow things down. If you re listening in bed, maybe dim the lights, fluff the pillow a bit, and let the day fade out, because we re about to drift into one of history's strangest, and yes, quietly terrifying obsessions. The fear of being buried alive. Now, before you tense up, don't worry. Nobody is actually burying you tonight. At least, I assume not. Unless you've made very questionable lifestyle choices and have enemies in the Undertaker's guild. In which case, you probably have bigger problems than this video. But for the rest of us, safe and cozy under the blankets, we can take a slow, curious look at how humans, for centuries, managed to convince themselves that one of the great hazards of life was being tucked away underground. A little prematurely. It is one of those fears that feels absurd from the modern perspective. We have monitors, we have ventilators, we have doctors who usually can tell the difference between a coma and death, usually, but before all that, the line was blurrier, much blurrier. And if there is one thing history shows us, it is that when people get anxious, they get creative. Which means over the centuries we've had bells attached to coffins, windows installed underground, even coffins with snack compartments. Yes, really. Because if you wake up 6 feet under, you may as well enjoy a biscuit while you wait for rescue. So, tonight, let us float back in time. Let us meet the anxious philosophers, the inventive undertakers, the panicking poets, and the poor souls who may or may not have actually woken up under the earth. Ancient beginnings. The fear of premature burial isn't modern. As long as humans have been burying other humans, the suspicion has been there. What if the person isn't actually gone? Take the Romans. They were, in many ways, practical. They also burned a lot of their dead, which, ironically, was a foolproof way to prevent premature burial. You can exactly wake up on a funeral pyre and say, actually, guys, I am fine. If you did, well, you weren't for long. Pliny the Elder, Rome's professional collector of weird facts, recorded cases where people were believed dead, only to revive on the pyre. His tone, as usual, is very matter of fact. Like, yes, here is a list of animals that glow in the dark. Here is a plant that cures gout, and oh yes, here are some people who were roasted alive by mistake. Classic Pliny. The Romans, at least, had a ritual of watching the body for several days before cremation, just in case. It was called the collatio, and yes, it was partly to prevent accidents, but also a convenient way to let relatives gather and gossip one last time about the deceased's questionable will. As Christianity spread and burial replaced cremation, the problem only got worse. A pyre was final, but a coffin, that was a gamble. Medieval hazards. By the Middle Ages, death was basically everywhere. Plague, famine, wars, you name it. And medical knowledge? Well, it wasn't winning any awards. Physicians relied on pulse checking that was more vibe-based than scientific. They believed in humors, astrology, and sometimes just guessing. And the church insisted that burials be done quickly, ideally within 24 hours, partly for hygiene, partly for theology. Souls weren't supposed to linger, which meant if you fainted from illness, or slipped into a coma, or simply had a very convincing nap, you might find yourself committed to the ground a little sooner than you'd like. Chroniclers mention coffins found with scratch marks inside. Were they caused by desperate corpses waking up underground, or by wood shifting under pressure? Hard to say, but you can imagine how stories spread. Medieval villages were rumor factories. All it took was one neighbor saying they heard noises from old John's grave, and suddenly everyone was staring suspiciously at the churchyard. Still, medieval people had a different relationship with death. They lived with it daily. To them, if God decided you should be buried alive, well, that was divine will. Good luck explaining to the Almighty that you just wanted a longer nap. Early modern anxieties. Fast forward to the 1600s and 1700s, Europe was getting more curious. Science was on the rise. Anatomy schools were dissecting bodies. Philosophers were questioning everything from monarchy to whether or not bloodletting actually worked. Spoiler, it didn't, but certainty about death, still shaky. Cases began to pile up. In Germany, a woman supposedly revived during her funeral procession, sat upright in her coffin, and caused the pallbearers to drop her. She lived for years afterward, at least according to the local pamphlets. Newspapers, which were just starting to become the social media of their time, loved these stories. Nothing sold better than the tale of someone waking up mid-burial. It had all the drama of a ghost story, but with the thrilling possibility that it could happen to you. Very clickbait, minus the clicks. Doctors, meanwhile, argued furiously about the signs of death. Was it the absence of breath, the absence of pulse, the onset of rigor mortis? Some recommended waiting for putrefaction, which is effective, but not very pleasant if you raise storing grandma in the parlor. So people improvised. Families sometimes kept vigil for days. Bodies were left lying in state not just for respect, but for practical reasons in case they decided to sit up and ask for soup. Testing for life. The methods of confirming death got, let us say, inventive. Doctors might pour vinegar down the throat, or hold burning feathers under the nose, or poke needles under fingernails. There were even suggestions of yelling very loudly in the deceased's ear, because nothing says eternal rest like someone screaming, "Wake up," inches from your face. Some tests were gentler. Mirrors held under the nose to detect breath. A glass of water placed on the chest to watch for movement. Not exactly high-tech, but at least less invasive than pepper in the nostrils. Still, mistakes happened, and every mistake added fuel to the growing cultural panic. By the late 1700s, Europe was buzzing with anxiety about premature burial. Philosophers like Voltaire mused about it. Medical journals debated it, and the public started to demand solutions. Enter the safety coffin. Oh yes, the great age of coffin innovation. If you were wealthy in the 18th or 19th century, you didn't just want a coffin. You wanted a safety coffin. Because why risk an embarrassing return from the grave when you could prepare in style? Designs ranged from simple to elaborate. The most common, a cord tied to the corpse's hand, connected to a bell above ground. If the hand moved, the bell rang. In theory, the cemetery caretaker would rush to the rescue. In practice, the caretaker was usually asleep, drunk, or just ignoring the noise, but still comforting. Other coffins included air tubes, little windows, and sometimes ladders. Yes, ladders. Because if you woke up buried 6 feet under, your first priority would definitely be climbing a ladder while half asphyxiated. Inventors competed to design the most reliable contraption. Patents were filed. Demonstrations were staged. It was a whole niche industry, because nothing says capitalism like monetizing people's existential dread. Poe in the Gothic vibe, of course. Literature got in on the fun. Edgar Allan Poe practically made a career out of premature burial stories. Tales like The Premature Burial or The Fall of the House of Usher played directly into public anxieties. Readers loved it. Nothing like tucking yourself in at night with a story about being locked underground forever, cozy. But Poe wasn't inventing these fears, he was reflecting them. Across Europe and America, the idea of live burial was everywhere. Sermons warned about it. Doctors lectured about it. Inventors cashed in. And cemeteries? They quietly added a few safety features, just in case. Vigil culture for ordinary families, though the simplest precaution was still time. Keep watch over the dead. Sometimes for hours, sometimes for days. Known as wakes, these vigils were practical as well as spiritual. They allowed relatives to grieve, neighbors to gossip, and, importantly, corpses to prove whether or not they intended to stay that way. Imagine the scene: a quiet parlor, candles flickering, relatives whispering, someone playing cards in the corner, and then Uncle Harold sighs, sits up, and asks why nobody offered him a drink. The party just got a lot more interesting. This tradition survives in some cultures today, though mostly for ritual reasons rather than fear of live burial. But in its origin, the logic was simple: better safe than sorry. Symbolic fear. What's interesting is how the fear of premature burial wasn't just medical, it became symbolic. Waking up underground, trapped, unheard, became a metaphor for oppression, for wasted potential, for being silenced. Romantic poets especially love the imagery, because nothing says tragic beauty like imagining yourself slowly suffocating while surrounded by roses. By the 19th century, the fear was so culturally embedded that it almost didn't matter whether it happened often in real life. The idea itself was enough. It was a nightmare everyone could relate to, even if they never saw it firsthand. So that's where we'll pause for now. From ancient pyres to medieval quick burials, from vinegar tests to safety coffins with bells, humanity has spent an impressive amount of energy worrying about this one very specific problem. And in the next part, we'll drift deeper into the Victorian heyday of burial anxiety, with even stranger inventions, some questionable medical practices, and of course, a few royals who were terrified of meeting the earth too soon. But for tonight, you can rest easy, unless you hear a faint bell ringing outside your window, in which case, maybe double-check the garden.